So recently I was at a concert. It was a local group that plays orchestral arrangements of video game music. While I listened, I was thinking about rocks as one does at a concert, and a question popped into my head. Are rock Pokemon even made of rock? Or are they made of some kind of chitinous shell material? Then this question cascaded into several other questions. If they are rocks, what kind? Can I apply my understanding of the rock cycle to these Pokemon? And if I can, will their evolutions and abilities make more sense? After the piece we were listening to ended, my wife turned to me and asked if I was enjoying the music. I was, but instead of saying that, my response was this question I have just posed to you. She stared at me for a moment and then went back to listening without giving my question an answer. Later on the car ride home, though, we did talk about it, and she helped me come up with a lot of ideas for this video. Hello, everyone. I am incredibly inconsistent, and welcome to my channel. I'm going into my third year of geologic study, and I love to learn, teach, and tell stories. This video today will do at least two of those things, and if you take anything at all from this video, you will have helped me accomplish all three. In today's video, I will be talking about Geodude and his evolutionary line. Also, as a disclaimer, I will only be using lore from the Pokedexes and from the games. The Pokedexes already contradict themselves a lot, and I don't want to get into the anime. Alright, well, with introductions and qualifying statements out of the way, let's jump in. Part 1. Are they rock or rock-like? In the previous paragraph, I listed a lot of questions that seem similar in nature, but understanding what is going on biologically with this evolution line will help give us a path forward. So, we will start with the dex entries and see what we can find. If we look at the dex entry, we can see that Geodude's title is the Rock Pokemon. This seems to insinuate that he is made of rock. In several of the dex entries for Geodude, it states that Geodude, when buried, is completely indistinguishable from rock. However, this could just be a very good camouflage, and it does not necessarily tell us one way or another if he is rock or not. If we investigate Graveler's Ruby dex entry, it says, Graveler grows by feeding on rocks. Again, this does not tell us one way or another, but it is good to know what the species consumes, as most organisms do not eat straight up rock, but I will come back to this point later. So far we have inconclusive answers from the dex entry, but in the Scarlet dex entry for Golem, Geodude's final form for those less familiar with the line, it says that it, Golem, is enclosed in a hard shell that is as rugged as slabs of rock. Or, in the Brilliant Diamond dex, it says, its boulder-like body is so tough even dynamite can't harm it. So, we have signs pointing to the idea that the Geodude line is not made up of rock, but it has some sort of ultra-strong shell that protects it. At this point in my Geodude studies, I thought that it was pretty definitive that he was not made of rock. His body was just made up of some calcareous or siliceous accretion. Well, this idea is fine, and I could come up with some interesting ideas about biosedimentary rock accumulation, something did not sit right with me. Then, a dex entry caught my eye. In Ultramoon's entry for Graveler, it says, if it travels into a river, it will explode with its last gasp. That is a bizarre reaction to water, even if you are 4 times weak to it. Then it dawned on me. Golem has 4 dex entries where it talks about how it will use massive explosions to move themselves up mountains or from peak to peak. This could be likened to the explosive power of volcanoes that have highly felsic magma. Very interesting. Now it looks like Geodude's line is not made up of rock, but has the ability to explode like some geologic features. That is much harder to pair with biosedimentation, but not impossible. At this point, I'm starting to worry that I'm going to have to start doing a lot of research about biosedimentary rocks. And honestly, while they're cool rocks, I'm not sure how I'm going to fit that in with the whole exploding thing going on. Then I found it, the piece of information that changed everything, the answer to my question. The Alolan Geodude dex entry for Sun states, its body is a magnetic stone, so that settles it. Geodude is made of rock, not just a rock-like material. However, this feels a little cheap. A lot of those entries talked about rock-like shells. So, how can he be made of rock if the shell is only rock-like? Well, honestly, I'm not sure. Sometimes the Pokedexes just like to say things. But I can think of a fun story about the life of a Geodude and his evolution's appearance and their abilities if their inner body is made of magma and biological material. So, let's take a look at what the life of a Geodude might look like. I present to you A Tale of Living Rock, Part 2. Congratulations, it's a Geodude. When a mommy and a daddy Geodude love each other very much, an egg will be produced. We're going to call him Geo. The egg is hot to the touch, nearly too hot to hold. If there is just a baby rock in there, why is it so hot? Well, baby Geo is not quite solid yet. He is a mix of magma. Minerals of all kinds swirl inside the egg, giving heat to his biological parts. Soon, the more mafic minerals will start to congregate together. They will group together on the surface of what will become his body. This outer layer will solidify first and become his skin. This type of freezing of more mafic minerals follows Bowen's reaction series, which states that the more mafic a mineral is, the higher its freezing temperature is. The fast cooling skin will resemble an aphanitic basaltic rock. As the skin continues to cool, the magma left inside its body will be more felsic. This felsic magma is mostly stored in Geo's stomach, where it will stay until further evolution happens. But Geo has a lot to do before he's ready to evolve. Once his skin has cooled sufficiently, Geo's body will have hardened into almost solid rock. At that point, he'll fling his fists and break open the egg, ready to start his journey. Now that Geo is out and about, he had a lot of training to do. Ready to prove he was the hardest Geodude on the mountain, he challenged other Geodudes to a strange ritual combat. They would clash their stony bodies against each other to see who chipped first. He found his first opponent, a bigger Geodude who shines in the sun. Geo struck first. He put everything he had into that first headbutt, and it seemed to do the trick. His opponent was knocked off balance. Thinking he now had the upper hand, he slammed into his opponent with all his force once again. A piece of rock flew into the air, and the rival let out a victorious cheer. Unfortunately, Geo had chipped first. His skin was not yet hard enough to face such a mature Geodude. The rival Geodude took this chipped stone off the ground and left with it. As time passed, Geo got into more and more clashes. Some battles had better outcomes than others, and after countless scuffles, Geo was also reflecting the sun, just as his first opponent once did. His pile of chipped stones grew bigger and bigger, as Geo became the hardest Geodude on the mountain. When he was not in battle, he was resting, half buried in the dirt, wondering why humans wanted to go up and down the mountains so much instead of hitting each other to prove who was harder. Finally, one day Geo returned to his old rival, ready to prove he was now the hardest Geodude on the mountaintop. The old rival shone more brilliantly than they did last time, but that did not deter Geo. They clashed once more. The relentless hits echoed in the valleys below. The commotion attracted other Geodudes and even a Graveler to watch. Hit after hit, and neither showed signs of cracking. Until finally, Geo overextended himself and lost his positioning. The older Geodude rose as high as it could to slam down on Geo, but Geo did not try to evade. He took the full force of the hit. His vision started to blur. Cheers erupted from the small mass of spectators that had gathered. Geo was dazed and saw a chipped piece of stone in front of him. His opponent made no move to grab it. The older Geodude grunted in respect, and Geo knew he had won. With this victory, Geo had proven he was the hardest on the mountaintop. He took his trophy and returned to his pile. The pile was now larger than he was, and to celebrate, he decided to bury himself in the stones and take a short nap. Part 3. Graveler time. Deep within Geo's stony interior, the ball of magma in his stomach grew hotter while he slept. The intense heat from this magma fused the stones Geo slumbered within to his skin. This made his body even larger, but it was still made of the same basaltic-like rock. The magma cooled once again, leaving it even more felsic than before. When Geodude woke up, he realized that his harsh training had paid off, and his reward was evolution. Geo was now a Graveler, and his life was never the same. An immense hunger gurgled within him as soon as he started his day. He found the nearest stones and consumed them. Inside of him, the stones he ate went through a daring journey of their own. They are crushed with his hard teeth and are ground to an even finer sediment as they traveled through his rocky, warm interior. Once the stones had gone through the length of his digestive system, the muddy slurry is pooled in an open space within him. This space will contract to squeeze the mud so hard that it starts to lithify. Before the slurry can fully harden, it is carried through the rest of his body through pores in the rock. This causes him to grow larger and his surface rock to be covered in a rough mud stone. This cycle dominated Geo's new life. He spent his days eating stones and slowly climbing mountains to their very peak. Once at the top, he must find a new source of stone, so he tucked his arms and legs and started his quick descent down. This roll down the mountain feels like nothing but a gentle ride to Geo, and with his new ability to generate rock, he does not need to worry about his exterior rock being chipped. While this is a nice journey for Geo, on the outside it is pure destruction. He tore trees from their roots and smashed boulders on impact. Hikers and most other Pokemon would not stand a chance against this rolling ball of destruction, and must always be on the lookout when climbing a mountain inhabited by Graveler. Luckily for them, the process is very loud, and it is easy enough to step out of the way. Once Geo has slowed to a stop, he will find the nearest snack and look for the closest mountain peak. With a new peak in sight, he started his journey again. This journey is much the same as the last. He picked up stones as he went and grew bigger. Once at the top, he was ready for another roll down. But Geo had not yet learned to look down the mountain to see what lies ahead. He tucked his arms and legs and began to roll. The steep peak meant he was picking up speed fast, so he had no way to see that there was a river in his path. Geo had avoided rivers for most of his life, and he and all the other Geodudes would bury themselves if it started to rain. But there was no way to avoid the water this time. Geo slammed into the river, and he was paralyzed by the shock of the impact. The sudden impact made his whole body tense, and the felsic magma in his core was compressed suddenly. This compression caused the magma to release in an immense explosion that sent Geo soaring through the sky and away from the river. He impacted the ground like a meteor, and was knocked out by the force of the landing. Some time later, he woke up in his crater, having learned a new and valuable lesson. Life had been easy for Geo since evolution, not like the training he had to do in his youth. Sometimes he thought of all the training he had to do to overcome his rival, but that was a different time. Now, all he had to do was climb mountains, get bigger, and knock some of that extra mass off while rolling down mountains. He had encountered a few more rivers, but he had become adept at learning how to spot them before starting his trips down. His favorite part of the journey was reaching the forest below the mountain to find some moss-covered rocks to eat. With few Pokemon on the mountain able to challenge him, he felt like the king of the mountains. That was until one day when Geo reached the top of a new mountain. He started his journey down the slopes, satisfied that he did not see any rivers, just a few rocks to smash through. Geo thought nothing of the boulders in his way. He knew that he would be at the bottom of the mountain soon enough, eating more moss-covered stone. That was until he hit one of the boulders and started to slow down. In fact, he had come to a complete stop now. Geo was confused by the short trip and opened his eyes to a dark, deep green stone. It almost looked like plates of armor. Geo had only seen this kind of stone one other time, and his magma chamber dropped. He looked up to see red eyes staring down at him, and a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. He had rolled into a golem. This would only end one way, and he knew it was going to be painful. Geo attempted to start a conversation with Golem, but it was no use. Golem clamped into Geo's hard skin with their teeth and started to lift him off the ground. Geo punched into the hard plates, but the sturdy armor showed no sign of damage. Knowing he would not smash his way through this situation, he used his lower arms and grabbed Golem's legs. He pulled as hard as he could. He managed to pull Golem's legs out from under them, and the pair started to roll. Golem was twisted off of Geo in the chaos, and the two crashed into the forest below. They stood up and readied themselves for another clash. Geo's reach was longer, but he would not be able to do any damage to Golem's shell. Geo knew his only hope would be hitting Golem's exposed head, arms, or legs. Before Geo could come up with an attack plan, Golem lunged forward, mouth wide open, closing any advantage Geo might have had. Geo managed to put one of his lower arms up just in time. Gollum's mouth found Geo's arm, and they bit down with the same vice-like force as before. Stone crushed under the pressure, and the mud slurry started to pour from the wound. Geo howled in agony, but the pain steeled his resolve, and the slurry started to harden. Gollum tried to open its mouth, but it could not break free from the newly formed stone. Geo grabbed a hold of Gollum's shell with his free lower arm to hold them in place. He raised both upper arms above his head and brought his stone fist down on Gollum's head as hard as he could. The sound of stone shattering filled his ears. He looked down at the crouched Gollum and hoped it was over, but Gollum started to rise, still holding his arm and mouth. Something was wrong, though. Geo was not moving with the rising Gollum. Gollum spat out the arm, and it thudded on the moss-covered ground. A green fluid trickled from the site of impact on Gollum's head, but they showed no sign of pain. Gollum screeched and retreated into its shell. The near perfectly round rock sphere sped towards Geo. Before Geo could put up his now 3 arms to try and absorb some of the impact, he felt a flash of heat and was blinded by a bright light. When Geo woke up, he was in another crater. The trees around the hole tilted backwards, as if afraid of the pit. Geo sat in the crater for a while. He thought about the new lesson he could have never known he would learn. Finally, he stood and looked at his 3 hands. Climbing would be hard for a while, but all he could do was move forward. At the top of the hole, he saw a pile of moss-covered stones neatly stacked into a pyramid. The top of the pyramid was a small chipped stone with no signs of moss. He recognized the stone almost immediately. It was the first chip he had ever sustained as a young Geodude. He stared down at the rock, and in an instant knew who he had been fighting. Gollum came out from behind a group of trees, holding more moss-covered stones. Geo and Gollum were inseparable after that day. Gollum foraged for stones so Geo could recover, and Geo, for his part, dug out new holes for them to sleep in every night. After some time, Geo realized Gollum was leading him in the same direction every day. Day after day they traveled, never changing directions, until finally Geo saw it. A mountain reaching into the sky with a cracked peak. Smoke billowed from the vents on the slopes of the behemoth mountain. Geo looked at Gollum, but they just kept walking. After a few more days of walking, and a hard climb up the craggy exterior of the volcano, they stood at the entrance to a cavern. The volcanic rock was jagged and unwelcoming. The opening was wide enough for the 2 of them to walk in side by side, but Geo followed behind Gollum. They started their venture into the black. They walked for some time in complete darkness. Geo wondered what he was going to find in there. That was until he started to see a glow, and the cave opened into an enormous sea of lava. Geo was no closer to understanding what they were doing here, and Gollum made no effort to clear things up. They stood at the edge of the expansive pool of lava, and when Geo leaned over to get a better look, he felt Gollum's hand on his back. The next thing he knew, he was in the lava, flailing his arms and howling. Part 4. Enter Gollum. Once completely submerged, Geo's panic was uncontrollable. The lava heated his body beyond anything he had ever felt, and he was not sure how long his stony exterior would hold up. He tucked his arms and legs in and curled into the tightest ball he could imagine. The magma inside of him started to grow hotter again, and he felt unbearable heat from both outside and inside his body. He sank. The outside layer of mudstone started to harden under the heat and mounting pressure of the lava. His basaltic stone insides started to undergo a process known as serpentinization from the heat of his magma inside and the pressure he put himself under while in his ball form. The craggy stone insides he had known his whole life started to become smooth and scaly. Then he finally realized he felt no more pain. It was replaced with a warm feeling he had never quite felt before. He had evolved into Gollum. The mudstone that covered his outer body metamorphosed into a sturdy slate. His insides had gone from hard, cracked basalt to smooth serpentinite. All of the mafic minerals in his body were now solidified, and his magma core was purely felsic. He uncurled his new body and felt his feet hit solid ground. he pushed off the solid surface with one powerful kick. Even though he was still round, the lava seemed to glide over his new stone shell, and he swam effortlessly through the lava. Finally, he broke the lava's surface, and when his vision cleared from the molten material, he saw a golem, but not his rival. He turned and saw more and more golems. As he continued to turn, they all started to grunt and stamp their feet as if to welcome him into their new, small society. Then he saw them, his companion. They were standing on the edge of the lava pool, stomping and grunting in congratulations. Once out of the pool, there was a small congregation of golem, all gathered around Geo. They bumped shells and hooted and bellowed with excitement. Once everything started to quiet down, the golem began to leave the cave in a line. Geo and his rival were at the end of the short, stony procession that marched out of the cave. Soon, they were all outside, and the head of the line grunted loudly. He approached Geo, and Geo saw that his shell was covered in moss. The elder slammed his shell into Geo, nearly knocking him off balance. The others watching now hooted in laughter. The elder gave a light hoot and stepped back. He retracted his head and limbs into his shell, and a moment later a bright flash of light and the sound of rocks exploding filled the air. The elder soared through the air and landed somewhere out of sight. One by one, the rest of the golem followed suit, all exploding in different directions, until only Geo and his companion remained. They bumped shells, and his rival stepped away from him, ready to blast off as well. Geo howled in protest, not wanting to leave his friend. Their partners stamped their feet, as if to tell him to get ready to travel together. So Geo stood next to his partner, ready to go. An explosion echoed in the mountains, and the dust settled. Geo was still standing in the same spot, not knowing how to perform the feat of flight. Worry started to build inside of him. He was going to get separated from his friend at this rate. Inside Geo's new body, his newly refined magma pool started to compress. He paced back and forth and had not noticed he was building up this pressure. He finally tucked himself into a ball and squeezed his eyes shut. The pressure released all at once, and he was sent flying. Geo found himself in yet another crater when he opened his eyes. But this time, he had meant to make a crater. He quickly clambered out of the hole and saw another hole of a similar size just meters away. The trees in the area were huge and unfazed by the golem's landing. He scanned all of the trees for any sign of his partner. He walked to the other crater and found them sleeping soundly in their shell, rocking back and forth, waiting for him. He grunted in excitement and went off into the woods to look for some moss-covered stones. Geo and his partner climbed every hill and mountain they could find, and protected each other whenever they had to shed their shells and wait for new ones to harden. They even learned how to bring the old shells to humans, for all kinds of stones in return. They returned to the volcano to induct new members into Golem society whenever they could. Every trip back, they got farther and farther ahead in line, until decades passed and the duo led the line side by side, leaving the volcanic cave and moss-covered shells. Alright everyone, that's the end of the story. Thank you all so much for staying and listening to this point. Those are some of my thoughts about Geodude and what it would be like if he was part of the rock cycle. This script started as I was going to factually talk about the rock cycle a little bit more and like reference papers and stuff. But then as I thought about it more, I was just like, I don't know, it's a Pokemon. They do things. Either way, I want them to be able to like explode, and you can't really talk about that like in a way that makes sense logistically. So I ended up telling a story instead about what it might look like if the rock cycle applied a little more stringently. I really enjoyed writing this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, leave a comment if you want to see me talk about any other rock type Pokemon or any other rock related thing. And I'll see you all next time.